I'm Rob Lucurio at Awards Heaven, and I'm really, really excited to talk to Chapman and Maclain Way today about their amazing Netflix series about the Dallas Cowboys. Guys, you have built a really impressive body of work from Wild Wild Country to Untold, and now this deep dive into the Dallas Cowboys. What drew you both to Jerry Jones and to this particular era of the Cowboys dynasty?
Yeah, I think we're always looking for character-driven stories is important to us. We're less interested in like topic-based. So, for example, we weren't even the biggest football fans or have the greatest knowledge of football in the NFL. But clearly, reading about Jerry's story, learning about his story, and then the Cowboys itself is such a fascinating institution known as America's team and their rich history, dating back to the 60s all the way to modern day. And so those two components combined with this like incredible resource of archival footage, 16 millimeter archive footage that a lot of it, most of it had never been seen before. I think those three things, Mac and I kind of jumped at this opportunity to try and tell this story.
I think for like the other thing that stood out quickly was just like the size and scale was fun and like going to be a challenge. But this was going to be an 8-part documentary series, which is obviously like a big canvas to have fun and play in. And then just honestly, like the budgets that we had on this were bigger than we've ever had before. So we got to do really fun stuff like shoot on big Western stage backdrops on studios and was really able to get like a big robust musical score and just a lot of shoot dates and a lot of edit weeks, and we still had to kind of make it on a tight schedule to get it out before football season, which I think was good for us. But obviously it was just like the Cowboys are a big scale and the documentary series felt like a big scale, so for us to be able to put together like a quick team and get the access that we were given to go in and shoot this thing was really, really cool. And I think that's what also kind of stood out at the top for us.
Yeah. The title suggests risk, ambition, high stakes decision making. What did you see as the biggest gamble in this story, and how did you end up portraying that on screen?
I think the hardest thing with a story like this is so many people already have a preconceived notion and idea of who Jerry Jones is and what the Cowboys represent. And I think it's important for Mac and I as filmmakers, we're always trying to find a way to kind of subvert the audience's expectations and what's a unique way into this world, into the story, something that audiences maybe haven't seen before or felt before. And I think after spending like just some time with Jerry, hanging out, talking to him, learning about his life story, I think we quickly realized there was a way to kind of shape this narrative that might be a new experience for audiences and hopefully one that they felt like they hadn't, seen or heard before.
Mhm. I'm wondering, as storytellers, how much do you wrestle with myth versus reality? Because if it was me, I'd be leaning into the mythology of the Cowboys and what they represent to the country. But there's so much that you have to deconstruct in this story about actual people and their lives. And I just wonder how you toe that line between the big picture and the more micro picture.
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at it. It's a great question. Um,
Are you getting muted?
are you getting, can you hear my feedback here? Sorry.
No, not at all.
Oh, hi. Okay, it went away. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question about myth versus fact, and especially in documentary because that the genre's audiences are tuning in because they want the true story. But there's something that Werner Herzog always calls the ecstatic truth, which I've always been kind of fascinated by as a filmmaker, and I do think documenting people's own mythologies often reveals a lot about who they are. And so, even if stories might get heightened and embellished and turned into metaphor, that often reveals a lot about the character's psychology and mindset and who they are. And I find you can often get at a deeper truth of people and humanity by documenting mythology. And so, it's not something that I think we've ever shied away from. I think it's something we always lean into in our work, is like how mythology shapes us as humans and how humans create their own mythologies.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was going to say, like, sometimes you'll have small facts that are facts that kind of get in the way of a larger truth. And that's what's hard, is like when you're like, okay, I actually kind of have like a general capital T truth of who I think this person is, and things that represent who they are. And I think the harder call to make is like, you obviously have to include an array of facts that capture who that person is, but then sometimes small, tiny, little stubborn facts are like really hard to work in because they kind of go against the larger truth, which is, and if you include those small facts, then sometimes, in my opinion, it actually can create an inaccurate, broader portrayal of something. So that's what's like also interesting to navigate. And then I think that the other thing that we try to do a lot is just, in terms of like who's right and who's wrong in our documentaries, I do think for the majority of the projects that Chapman and I have been a part of, we really do try to stick to like, we are in a singular person's POV within a scene. And that POV might change based on bringing in new characters and throughout the documentary, and you'll get many different POVs or opinions or perspectives of the same event, hopefully to create a little bit of a Rashomon of like, okay, what did actually happen and what did not. But when we're in a scene and it is a main character or either a sporting character and they're the ones that are leading the charge on the storytelling, we really like back them up with editing, with music. Like, we try to really make their storytelling as robust as possible. But then if we go to a new character, we try to give that person the same exact treatment as well.
Yeah, that makes sense because fundamentally, you are telling us a story about people, as no matter if they're the most famous person like Jerry Jones or just a Joe Blow that no one's ever heard of before. We, the audience, do need an emotional entry point so that we will follow along for this journey, right? And so I always wonder with documentary filmmakers, is relatability something that you build? Is it something that you discover? Like, in your view, does a subject need to be liked, or do we just need to understand them?
It's a very good question. I think, and oftentimes in our work, when we get, notes back from the studio, likability is always a big important term for executives. It's less so for us. I think that, me personally, when I watch art, a movie or a film, I learn a lot about myself in characters who maybe aren't as savory or good or have the best amazing qualities. I think all characters are kind of a mirror for the audience to make sense of their own life, their own actions, their own flaws, and all of that. So for me, the more flawed a character is, oftentimes the more profound it is for me as an audience member. So when we're making, I try to keep that in mind for the audience, that, it's not, I want the documentary to be enjoyable, but I'm less concerned about whether an audience likes a character or not. And oftentimes I find that, like, there are simple things that unite us all. And so you take someone like Jerry Jones, and he might be the most hated owner in the history of sports, but you take someone who, struck oil, gambled their entire fortune to live out their life's dream, and you can't help but have a little bit of respect for someone who does that. So I do try to find moments of relatability, I think, is important, but likability, I think, less so.
The other thing too, that this, because it's a great question, it's like probably a conversation that Chapman and I have on every single project, and a variation of that question every day in the edit bay. And the other thing that I have tried to stick to, but it's hard, it doesn't always work out, is if your characters are entirely likable, then I would argue that that's just a documentary that's reconfirming what you think you already know about someone, which in my opinion is not the most fun experience of watching a documentary, because there's no learning process, there's no discovery sensation, there's no ahas. And listen, you have to give people somewhat of a familiar context for them when they enter into a documentary. But as a filmmaker, I always find it more enjoyable, and as a viewer, when I'm being told it's something different, or it's an angle, or it's a feeling from something that I didn't quite expect, which I think is a little bit of a cousin to the likability question as well, because if everyone's likable, then I think that just kind of reconfirms what you think you know about them as well.
Yeah, for me, the dopamine hit when watching a show like this is watching someone larger than life drop their guard. I just find that so, I just, it's a way in. And I really, really value those moments. And there's a few of those in this show. And I just always wonder, there has to be some skill about getting someone like in the spotlight to drop their guard. Do you nudge it? How do you earn people's trust so that they will kind of let you in?
I think it's good. I think the one advantage maybe documentary filmmakers have is it's less pure journalism. So we're not necessarily there grilling our subjects and asking yes or no, got questions or gotcha questions. It truly is a little bit more of a collaboration. And I think that makes some people more uncomfortable sometimes, which makes sense. I totally understand that, but it is more of an art form than journalism. And so we are capturing a performance, and even an interview is a performance. And so, Mac and I work with our subjects. We always say, like, the best documentaries don't tear down their subjects, they build up their subjects. And like Max said, you can build up opposing views of that subject as well, and you want those to be equally robust. So I think for us it's really working with our subjects to understand their story and try to encapsulate their story in the cinematic, in a documentary format. I think is important. I think by doing that, it allows our subjects to relax a little bit, to go a little bit deeper, to bring their guard down. And then I think the other thing is, I just think one-on-one interviews are a little bit of a lost art form in a way. I think so many documentaries these days go the verite route, which I love. I love verite documentaries as well, and they have and they're very. Also an incredibly immersive experience, but it's uncomfortable to sit across from someone and ask them questions and go back and forth and challenge and listen and empathize. And it really is like a, a skill that's not practiced as much anymore. And so I think it's something that Mac and I take a lot of pride in. We're very invisible in the interviews. You don't often hear our voices. You don't feel our presence, but it's something that we spend a lot of time talking about. And how do we cultivate, raw, vulnerable, honest interviews is something that we spend a lot of time on.
I think the other thing that was, I mean, the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is like, I remember an early conversation that Chapman and I had with almost like a filmmaker mentor of ours, Todd Field. And I think that Todd had been asked the question, like, how do you get such great performances out of your actors? What makes you such an exceptional director? And he kind of had a little bit of a self-effacing answer, which was, well, I cast well. And to a degree, I think Chapman and I are in that bucket well too, where as long as people are introspective about their lives, then I am so confident that we can find a great interview in that person. But we normally do usually start our relationship with like, well, let's meet up, let's spend a day or two together, let's have coffee. And then just through that process, we did that with Jerry, and Jerry was, I mean, immediately someone that had not spent, in my, even in his words, a lot of time looking back at the chapters of his life, but enjoyed that experience to a certain degree and enjoyed looking back on the key milestones of his life, especially at the age that he's at now. And so I remember Chapman and I, after one of our first meetings, we're like, whoa, he is an emotionally intense but still charming guy enough that he can carry a series in our opinion, and we are excited to work with him on that.
For fans of the Cowboys, this show is they'll be all over it like white on rice. But then for people who may not follow football at all, it's so accessible. I was very surprised by that, and so compelling because it's you don't need to have any pre-knowledge. So I'm wondering then, for those two camps, how do you hope everybody walks away from, and how do you hope they will feel when they walk away from and finish watching this series?
Go ahead, Mac.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that we do come in with, this was probably the most like well-known story that we had ever done, which is a very different premise compared to something like our last documentary series, which was based on an Elvis impersonator who got wrapped up in a presidential assassination story. And even though that made big news, that story does kind of start as filmmakers with, let me tell you about something that you don't know about. Whereas with the Cowboys, people do have a frame of reference, especially if they lived it, of these three Super Bowls. But I think it goes back to what Chap said earlier, which is like, as long as we find ways that we can subvert what this audience is thinking about, we think we can make an enjoyable series. And so I do think, though, that there are some very specific things that also drew us to this series that are important takeaways for me. Is like, for one, learning about the relationship between Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson was something that immediately stood out as, okay, these are guys that have known each other since college. They went through a transformative experience together, winning a national championship at the University of Arkansas. Jerry gave Jimmy his first chance in the NFL. They went on to win 2 Super Bowls, and then they ended up having a 30-year feud where they didn't talk that much. So for us, that was immediately like enough of a Shakespearean drama in a way that we were like, you don't need to know football, American football. You don't need to know sports that much to understand the human drama between these two guys. And so that, as a filmmaker, gives you like immediate confidence. And so in terms of like walking away, like, I hope that learning about a relationship like that informs you on like the humanity of people. I know that sounds lofty, but that would be my goal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think like there is something interesting. At least the idea of risk is something that I think about a lot in my life. And, if you're someone that takes zero risks in life, then you might not achieve what your dreams are, what your hopes are, what you want to do. And so every kind of endeavor, everything in life, I think the things that have the most profound impacts on us are things that require a little bit of risk to do. And so for me personally, I think like audiences watching it, I would love for them to kind of wrestle with that idea of what is risk, and is there good risk, and can the right kind of risk change the trajectory of your life?
I love that. That didn't really occur to me, but it totally makes sense. Final question is this. I have one sibling and I would love to work with her. I think it would be so cool. We would just have a certain look that we would know what that meant. I'm wondering then, does your relationship and the fact that you're brothers, do you have a shared shorthand? Does it speed up the creative process? Does it allow you to raise the bar so you can be really honest when you each have ideas? How does that work together?
Yeah, I always feel like the greatest advantage of working with your brother is the ability to be like brutally honest without having the mental anguish of like, am I being too mean? Am I not being kind enough? Like, we love each other very deeply, and we're each going to show up at work tomorrow no matter what. And so I do think it helps us get to a decision process faster, where we maybe don't always have to be so conscious of the other person's feelings and thoughts. I think as we get older, I'm much more appreciative and aware of like how valuable it is what we have in terms of our relationship. So I try to be much more careful, I think, in how we collaborate and work together, maybe than when we were younger. It is something that's precious, and it's something that can be broken. So I think, just for me personally, it's something that I take a lot of care in trying to maintain our relationship as brothers and as collaborators. But I always tell people, like, it's the coolest thing in the world to work with a family member. I think like to be able to share the successes and the failures and the struggles, and do it with someone you love. And our older brother does all the original music for our documentaries. And so for me, it's kind of been like the greatest joy of my life to be able to work with my family.
Yeah, it totally has been. I'll echo that 1,000%. And then, yeah, you're right. Like, the other thing too is just practical. Like, our shorthand is pretty amazing. It's a shorthand within our own documentaries we've made, which is a little embarrassing when you're like talking. You're like referencing your own art as like, this is what I kind of want it to be like. And they're like, oh wow, all right. You just like, but like Chap and I, like, there is an amazing shorthand of like, just because Yes, every documentary has like very unique problems that need to be solved, but the more that you do this, the more that the problems start to rhyme with other scenes or other narrative beats that you've had or other character development issues, and like being able to pick up the phone and call Chapman, and before I even finish the conversation, he knows exactly the question. He knows exactly what I'm talking about, and he knows exactly what to do about it. Is like, because we have that experience together. Is like, if I didn't have that, then I that would make my job a million times harder. So it's really nice being able to have that quick shorthand, just the experience that we've had together to help get through like some sticky problems sometimes that pop up on documentaries. So that's a real nice convenience.
You know what? You get to work with your brother. You have a successful series, a run of them with Netflix. You win Emmys, and like really, life can't get much better than that, guys. And on that note, thank you so much for your time, everybody. America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys, is streaming on Netflix. I highly recommend it. Thanks both for your time today.
Thanks so much for chatting with us, Rob. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, this was really cool.